also, of course, then reintroduce yourself so you can better explain your expertise. I was super brief, so it's a pleasure if you tell us something about you guys. And I think that we can start. So thank you again. I always remind the students to take advantage of all these sessions to learn as much as they can, and also to learn things that they can deliver and explain to their colleagues during their ITDM courses. So thank you again and enjoy the session.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to you all. I would like, first of all, I would like to introduce myself. Thank you, Monica, for introducing us. Me and Ayub, we basically have the same background. I am Wiem Awisha, a PhD candidate in health sciences at the Faculty of Medicine of Sousse, Tunisia. And we both are certified communication trainers. We have an international diploma in public health, and we are about to finish our thesis in the next couple of months. So today we are gathered to talk about crisis and risk communication in public health, which will be presented by me and my colleague Mohamed Ayub Tlili. I'm looking forward to the exchange we're gonna make in these 2 hours. I count on your participation, so it would be interactive and less boring. If you do not understand or have a question about anything, please feel free to raise your hand and notify either me or Ayub. And of course, we can stop at any time and clarify things for you. So let's start with a simple introduction. During public health crisis, you know that the public wants to know what we know. They watch every move and observe every passing emotion of those responding to an emergency. Our job as public health communicators should be to offer the information that the public needs and counter some of the harmful behaviors that are common during emergencies, so they can effectively support the public and the organizations that are offering help, such as emergency departments, civil services, police departments, etc. In fact, during these emergencies, local government authorities are better able to ensure the public's well-being if they are prepared ahead of time. One of the most important preparedness measures is to assemble an emergency response team, one that includes communication experts and a plan for getting critical information out to the public once the emergency happens. Let's have a little bit of talk about the world that we are living in. In fact, we are living today in a changing world, one that is scattered with disasters and emergencies, and thus our ability to deal effectively with disasters is becoming more and more relevant because the factors that tend to increase risks are also increasing. First factor is the increased population density in high-risk areas. As you know, areas are becoming more densely populated, more potential victims are at risk when a disaster strikes. Part of this increase in density occurs in disaster-prone areas, such as high-risk flood plains, locations near earthquake faults, coastal hurricane areas, unstable hillside, etc. Another factor is the emerging infectious diseases and antibiotic resistance. Following World War II, it was widely believed that the humans were winning the war against infections. However, the world is facing an increased threat nowadays of emerging infectious diseases and re-emerging infections, accelerated, of course, by the globalization and the environmental changes. So one of the, we have examples of H1N1 that happened in 2009, and most recently COVID-19 that hit hard and you can say that it changed our lives. Another factor is contributing to more public health emergencies, which is increased international travel. In fact, it plays a role in the rapid spread of diseases. In fact, a virus originating in Africa or South Asia can arrive on North America shores within 24 hours. Added to the increased terrorism that we are facing today, using strategies such as simultaneous attacks, which induce mass casualties, killing or injuring many people at once. Therefore, we found ourselves in the obligation to manage and to deal more effectively with public health emergencies. And in this perspective, we wanted today, through this lecture, to introduce participants to the main concepts and basic notions relating to crisis communication, and to make you, help you understand the key principles and best practice recommendations necessary for an effective crisis communication in healthcare. The plan throughout this lecture will be as follows. I will be introducing you to the general concepts. Then with Ayub, we're gonna go through crisis life cycle and communication crisis best practices, the do's and don'ts. And with me, again, I will get back at you to talk more in detail about the spokesperson requirements and challenges of the job. And we're gonna finish with a conclusion. So we're gonna start with the first chapter. We're gonna have a rundown with the key concepts of today's presentation. And we're gonna start with the first concept, which is communication. So who can tell me what is communication? What's communication? When you hear communication, what are the words that come through your mind? Yeah, Ines?
Well, there is a sender, there is a receiver, and the channel between them, and a message is being delivered. So I think communication as like getting a message from point A to point B without any obstacles.
Yes, exactly. You are an expert in communication. Okay, so communication is like Ines said. You talked briefly about the communication process, and we're gonna see it in details together. So communication is defined as a process of reaching mutual understanding, during which participants, communicator, and the audience exchange, create, and share thoughts, opinions, and also information. The term communication is derived from the Latin word communis, which means to share. And it is important to know that effective communication is when the message conveyed by the sender is understood in the by the receivers in exactly the same way that it was intended. Let's have a look at the communication process, which refers to a series of actions or steps taken in order to successfully communicate. For those of you who don't know the process, as you can see, it involves several components, such as the source or the sender, who sends a message that has been encoded through a channel to the receivers, which in turn, he decodes the message and sends a feedback. All of this happen in a certain context. The context determines the quality and the importance of the communication. Okay, moving on to the next concept. What is crisis? Any idea what's crisis? What does it refer to? What is a crisis? Okay, a crisis, I'm gonna, okay, Victor, please.
Well, I think that a crisis can be some extra situation that we don't prevent or we don't be prepared for.
Yes, exactly. So it's an unstable situation that happens, something that gets us out of the normal things that we are used to. Thank who's talking?
Şimdi şöyle farklı işlerden
Okay. So let's carry on. Donc, crisis, crisis is derived from the Greek term crisis, meaning decision to response to a particular situation. The term crisis refers to a decisive moment in the evolution of a process and its threat to increase uncertainties. Means it is, like Victor said, it's an unstable situation of extreme danger or difficulty, and it usually represents a turning point, a deterioration of a situation. Thank you, Victor, for your participation, and let's move on to the next concept. So now we have, let's focus on these two concepts. We have public health crisis and public health risk. So according to you, you think there's a difference between these two terms? Yes, Ines?
Well, the risk happens before a crisis. If there is a risk, not necessarily something's wrong. Like, for example, there is a risk that we all get COVID, but it's a crisis when like 1 million people get COVID at the same day.
Exactly, Ines. Thank you so much for your participation. So, as Ines said, the risk usually happens before the crisis. So, a risk, public health risk, is a rapidly evolving public health threat. It's an event, a condition, or an agent that, which by its presence has the potential to rapidly harm directly or indirectly an exposed population, sufficiently leading to a crisis. On the other hand, a public health crisis is when it's a sequence of events following a public health threat, following a risk, where the limited time available for deciding and the large degree for uncertainty lead to overburdening the normal response capacity and undermining of authority, making the local health systems overwhelmed that the people depends on and which make them unable to respond to the public's needs and demands. So here are some types of public health crises that I'm sure everyone is already familiar with. We have communicable diseases, Ebola, measles, COVID. Also, we have mass infection or mass exposures, such as bioterrorism accidents, accidental exposure via leak or spill, etc. We have the mass casualty events, events that cause mass casualties. They could be related to non-terrorism, such as plane crash explosions, or terrorism, such as bombing, mass shooting, etc. We have nuclear accidents, and of course, the most common type of public health crisis are natural diseases and weather-related issues, such as storms, floods, tornado, earthquakes, etc. Okay, now that we have mentioned public health crisis, we know that they certainly have some repercussions. So we're going to talk about that. But before, I'm going to ask you a question. Who can tell me what could be the repercussions of a healthcare crisis? What are the consequences of a public health crisis? Yes, Winston?
I was thinking the one I can think of off the top of my head is like, I guess, like, for example, with COVID, like an upheaval or like a damage to the healthcare system and how the healthcare system has to like reset or somehow figure out. It's like, for example, okay, it's exposed that, for example, where I come from in Hong Kong, it's like the system collapsed. We weren't able to handle, it was overwhelmed. And then we had to reset in a way like, okay, this needs to be improved for the next wave of health, the next like bout of the crisis.
Exactly. Thank you, Winston. Ines?
I just want to add something to what Winston said, like about COVID-19 and stuff. I think that it doesn't only affect the COVID-19 response, but it also affects like normal people coming for hypertension and diabetes follow-up or anything, like the normal healthcare system is gonna be overly burdened because of managing the crisis. So it's gonna affect a lot of people that really need this, like the chronically ill people and reproductive health care and all vaccinations and all that stuff.
Thank you, Ines. Excellent, excellent thoughts. So as Winston and Ines said, we have public health crises have major influence and repercussions on the healthcare systems, but certainly they also have repercussions on our daily lives. So repercussions of healthcare crisis, they can range from high levels of illness, deaths, social disruption to the economic loss. So first of all, first repercussion of health crisis is that everyday life is going to be disrupted, like it happened in COVID, because so many people at the same time are going to could become seriously ill at the same time. That's why we have seen things such as social distancing and lockdowns. Also, impact can range from school and business closings to the interruption of basic services such as public transportation and food delivery. And a substantial percentage of the world's population will require a form of medical care, whether it's COVID related or pandemic related or it's not, thus making healthcare facilities overwhelmed and creating a shortage of staff, hospital staff, beds, ventilators, and other supplies. Now let's talk a little bit about the mental states during a crisis. In fact, as you already know that, disasters and emergencies take a toll on human life and are usually characterized by change, high levels of uncertainty and complexity. So during disasters, people feel a wide range of emotions and psychological barriers that interfere with the public's response and cooperation. It is important to know for the crisis communicator to know that certain patterns usually happen and they need to expect them and understand that these patterns affect communication. The first thing that the people might feel is, of course, uncertainty. As you already know, there are more questions than answers during crisis, especially at the beginning. So at that time, the full magnitude of the crisis, the cause, the actions that people should take to protect themselves may be unclear. And this will make them feel fear, anxiety, and dread. Fear of the unknown may be the most debilitating of all psychological responses to disasters and prevent people from taking actions. Because when people are afraid and do not have the adequate information, they may react in inappropriate ways to avoid the threat. According to psychological research, if feelings of fear and anxiety and confusion grow unchecked during a crisis, the community members will most likely begin to feel hopeless and helpless. And if this happens, they may withdraw mentally or physically, get less motivated and less able to take actions to help or save themselves. There's also denial. In this context, denial refers to refusing to acknowledge either imminent harm or harm that has already occurred. Of course, denial can occur for several reasons. First scenario is that people may not have received enough information to recognize the threat. Second scenario is that they may assume the situation is not as bad as it really is, either because they haven't heard the most recent warnings, they didn't understand what they were told, or only heard a part of the message. And third scenario is that the people may receive and understand the message, but behave as if the danger is not as great as they are being told. For example, if the people may get tired of evacuating for threats that prove to be harmless, which can cause people to deny the seriousness of future threats. Last but not least, it's the panic. Usually, officials may be concerned that people will collectively panic by disregarding official instructions and creating chaos, particularly in public places, such as grocery stores, pharmacies, airports, etc. However, it's important to know that contrary to what we see in the movies, people seldom act completely irrationally during a crisis. Now that we have defined the two concepts of communication and crisis, and we talked about the public health crisis, how the public health crisis take a toll on human life and their repercussions on and the mental instability that they engender, we're gonna now define crisis communication. So I'm gonna ask you a question. According to you, what is crisis communication? Is it important? Okay, Abdiel?
Yeah, I think that crisis communication would be like the systems established during a crisis to communicate between the people that are in charge of the response.
Between them? Between them?
Yeah, between them and towards the people.
Exactly.
In general.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So as Abdiel said, crisis communication is in the field of public health, crisis and communication are closely linked. All public health crises are also communication crises. And Dr. Barbara Reynolds from the CDC defined crisis communication as a way to talk to people, a set of principles that allow us in the heat of a crisis, when the unthinkable happens, to be able to get a message through to the people in a way that they can actually understand it and act on it. Crisis communication, it's the effort made by experts to provide information, to help people make the best possible decisions about their well-being within nearly impossible time constraints, and also to ultimately make them accept the imperfect nature of choices during the crisis, such as evacuation. Who wants to leave his home? It's not something that the public would accept easily. Thus, you need to make them accept that so it can happen. And crisis communication, it is important. In fact, it is a vital component of public health emergency response. The initial objectives are to prevent further illness, injury, or death. Secondly, it aims to restore or maintain calm and to engender confidence in the operational response. Being able to communicate effectively is essential, and well-planned and well-executed communication plans should be fully integrated into every stage of a crisis. So it can help reduce death and suffering, and can address a variety of potentially harmful behaviors that we know are already common in emergencies. It is important to know that effective communication requires an understanding of the audience, the goal to achieve, and the message to convey. It also requires acceptance and an understanding of the role of a communicator by the audience. So as I was saying, effective crisis communication is a two-way activity. You need to listen to your public, to your audience, and acknowledge their concerns. If the public is concerned about evacuation, you need to address that. If the public is concerned about death or injuries toll, you need to address that. If the public is concerned about how the infection is spread and how to stop the spread of the infection, even if you don't have that information, you need to address that. Okay, Now, let's look at some examples of ineffective crisis communication, starting with Hurricane Maria. So, as some of you probably know, Hurricane Maria was a catastrophic Category 4 hurricane that made landfall in Puerto Rico on September 2017. The government's official count was at 60, death count was at 64, and the estimated death toll was at 2,975 deaths. There's a huge gap between the official numbers and the estimated numbers. In a study published in a Journal of International Crisis and Risk Communication Research, it provided the first in-depth detailed look at communication failures before and after Hurricane Maria. Elizabeth Andrade, the lead researcher of this study, said that effective communication about Hurricane Maria's impact could have helped to minimize rumors and contribute to the government of Puerto Rico's credibility. The failures noted in the study were mostly related to the post-disaster media environment, which was saturated of numerous conflicting and unofficial death counts, incomplete or contradictory information from government officials, which led people to believe that the government communication about mortality was not transparent or credible. Moving on to the next example, which it's perhaps the most canonical example of failed communication in the world, which is the nuclear incident of Chernobyl. In fact, information provision was selective and restrictive, particularly in the immediate aftermath of the accident. There was an extreme, huge lack of transparency that endangered the lives of countless people. Communication was neither prompt nor truthful, and millions suffered as a result. An example of the lack of transparency was related to the delays in informing the public. In fact, the accident happened on May 26, 1986, and the government did not acknowledge the accident until May 14, which means after 19 days in which people were exposed to radiation because they were not instructed to evacuate and thus this was the result of a complete irrational authority communication. Okay, I hope the first part of the lecture was clear and understood. Now that we finished introducing the general concepts, I'm going to leave you with Ayoub to talk more about the crisis life cycle and the crisis communication best practices, the do's and don'ts. And I will be back at you to talk more about the spokesperson challenges and requirements in more detail.
Hello, everyone. I hope you are doing well. So as William just said, we will be continuing this lecture by providing some information about the communication crisis life cycle. Just 1 second that I share my screen. Okay, is everybody seeing my screen now? Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. As we said, we're gonna continue this lecture with the crisis communication life cycle. Of course, if you have any question, you can ask anytime. If you have a comment or another thing to enrich the discussion, you can also say that, so that the lecture can be interactive and that we can learn from each other. So before I want first to start with this question. When do we start talking about crisis communication? That means here is a crisis, and purely timeline speaking, not to influence your answers, there is the before the crisis, the during the crisis, and the after the crisis. During which phase we can talk about crisis communication. Is it before the crisis, during the crisis, or after the crisis? We can start talking about crisis communication. Yes, Ines?
Well, I think that it's all the time, like before the crisis for the preparedness and the training and that stuff. And then during the crisis to communicate between the AMP and the ambulances and the hospitals. And after the crisis for the feedback and the briefing and just measuring how well everything go.
Yes, exactly. So next time you will present this lecture with us, Ines.
Thank you.
So, as Ines said, the crisis communication life cycle includes 5 phases, which are the pre-crisis phase, the initial, the maintenance, the resolution, and the evaluation. So there is the before the crisis, the during the crisis, and the after the crisis. Of course, you know that for emergency or disaster preparedness, we start obviously before the crisis. So this preparation should be also in terms of communication. Let's begin with the pre-crisis phase. You should know that the success of an effective crisis communication is largely predicated on the amount of work that goes into planning and preparing for a crisis. Questions such as what information needs to be in place, who makes decisions, who gives orders, who follows them, what are the procedures for carrying out response initiative, are some of the too many questions that can emerge when a crisis is breaking. And the more questions that can be anticipated and answered ahead of time, the better. So a crisis is not at all the time to begin thinking about these questions. On the contrary, it's really the worst time to do so because the safety of citizens is at stake and every second counts. We literally can save lives by being fast enough. Now, I know that Ines gave some examples. Who can give me another examples of or some examples of what can we prepare in advance for the matter of crisis communication? That we can prepare in advance related to the communication and the crisis. Yes, Rabbe. Sorry for my spelling for the nouns. You can correct me anyway.
It's okay. So I was thinking that hospital disaster management plan can be one of the examples of something that we can do before crisis because the plan actually tells you what to do during an emergency, who to take orders from, and who gets to do who and who becomes in charge. So hospital disaster plan could be an example.
Yes, exactly. Hospital emergency preparedness or disaster preparedness could be a very good starting point to start talking about crisis communication, because when we know the crisis that can emerge, we can address the points related to crisis communication. So first of all, like you said, so exactly like emergency preparedness, we will have to predict and address all the types of emergent risks or disaster we are most likely to face. So disaster preparedness is not the crisis management, or disaster management is not the crisis management, but as I said, it's a starting point to figure out which elements of the communication we can include in our communication plan. So as we said, we predict all the types of risks that we are most likely to face. For example, if there is a nuclear reactor, we have to be prepared for a possible explosion. If we live in a coastal area, there is a risk of flooding. I don't know, depending on the location, geology, etc., there is a risk of earthquake or tsunami. So we can predict many types of crises and be prepared for them. Potential risks are identified. We have to prepare and educate the public about the possibility of risk by providing warning and educational messages. Also, we have to build and test our communication system and identifying the organizational structure responsible for communication activities, whatever its name, communication command center, communication support team, etc. So lists of contacts with addresses and phone numbers should be drawn up and updated regularly. That should be the list of contacts of the communication team, the frontline team, such as civil defense, emergency department, police, etc. The media, the municipalities, emergency services, etc. Also, we have to identify roles and responsibilities. That means who does what within the communication system. And also, when we say communication network, means we have to foster alliances and partnerships. First, to seek any kind of help if needed, and also to ensure that all the experts are speaking in a coordinated manner, whatever their background and their affiliation. So here are some examples of communication team prepared lists. As you can see, we have each team member with his primary and backup. Also, here is a list, template of list of communication team members with contacts and defining the role and tasks of each member. So till now we are talking before the crisis, our communication plan depending on potential risks. Also, depending on the type of risk, we have to prepare our communication plan. So for every type of risk, we have to draft key initial messages and test them for use in later stages. Obviously, specific details such as the number of victims, etc., can be filled later. Also have to identify potential spokesperson. So do you know what a spokesperson is? Does anybody has any idea about the spokesperson? Yes, Ines?
Well, formally, the spokesperson is someone who is responsible to speak on behalf of an organization, like the military spokesperson, for example, or the government spokesperson. So during a disaster, he is or she is the one responsible for communicating with the public.
Okay, exactly, Ines, but no, it's who will talk on behalf of the organization. That's true, but it's not the only one person who will talk on behalf or on of the organization. So as mostly Ines said, the spokesperson is the one representing the institution or organization, talks to the media and communicate and inform public what he wants, and gather public, communicate the public needs, etc., on behalf of the institution. So we have also to identify target audiences to communicate with, because not every crisis will touch all the population, or at least equally. For example, if we have the risk of extreme heat waves, for example, the target population is going to be all the old people. If there is a risk of pandemics affecting babies, the target population is going to be mainly mothers or parents. For the risk of earthquake, tsunami, we will target everybody, or we're going to be specific to a limited area in the city. And even channels will change. For example, to reach young people or teenagers, we can use mainly social media, for example. And to reach old people, we can use other channels like TV, radio, written spokesperson, etc. So once the target population audiences is identified, we have to identify the communication resources and channels we can use to reach and influence our target population. Also, we can prepare basic press releases that can be quickly adapted during the crisis, and we don't forget to consider logistics. For example, where would the press conference or briefing be held? Is it easily accessible? Is the room large enough? Will it accommodate media needs? Will speakers need chairs, tables, podiums, etc.? And finally, again, exactly like in emergency preparedness, that's why we emphasize that is a good starting point. So exactly like in emergency preparedness, we implement simulation exercises and conduct training as much as needed. So all what we saw now was related to before the crisis. Let's move on to during the crisis, and more specifically during its initial phase. So at the very beginning, before even talking to public or target audiences, we have to get organized. That means we have to notify and share information within the team. Actually, crisis manager should never forget that employees are important target audience during a crisis. They need to know what happened, what they should do, and how the crisis will affect them. And additionally, well-informed employees provide an additional channel of communication for reaching other audiences if needed. Also, once we know the crisis, we establish the crisis communication team. So before the crisis, we identified potential team for each potential risk. Now that we know the type of crisis, we established the appropriate team that will be in charge of leading creation and implementation of the communication strategy, and without forgetting to clearly define roles. That means who can say what and to whom, who to call, in what order they should be contacted, etc. We also have to collect the most complete information possible, such as the crisis circumstances, consequences, and anticipated outcomes. And finally, we have to designate crisis spokesperson, or what we call in crisis communication, the Tiger Team communication. One important remark is that there is a difference between spokespersons and communication coordinators. So who can give me the difference? Because there is always a confusion that people think that the spokespersons are the communication coordinators, but they are not the same thing. Yes, Abdil?
Well, I guess the communication coordinator will be the person in charge of commanding what will be said, and the spokesperson will be the one executing what is going to be said.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So, your colleague said the spokesperson will be the person who will speak to the media, but not essentially who will be drafting in messages, identifying target audiences, etc. So the spokesperson is the person who will speak to the media, and the communication coordinator will prepare key messages, helps identifying the target audience, helps identifying the best channels to reach these target audiences, etc. Also, we have to identify our target population and the channels to reach this population. Who can give me some example of channels we can use to reach or influence our target audience? Which means we can use to diffuse our messages. Not all at the same time, please. Yes, Abdil?
Well, the first one, it occurs to me, it will be like it's like the most official or most used is by the TV or by the press conference on things like that. It's like the most formal one. So that will be my first choice.
Yeah, that's good. But we can use other channels of communication. For example, can't we use, for example, tweets, Facebook? What do you think? Yes or no? Okay, so the important thing you have to know that Thank you. Rana. So the important thing you have to know is that, sorry, I'm just reading the chat. Yeah, that was my remark. Actually, when a crisis occurs, the most important thing, it's not to think about the official channels or the informal channels. The most important thing is that the message is diffused to the right target population. The important thing is there is no actually official channel and an official channel, but there is an official spokesperson, an official sender, and an informal sender. That what counts, not really the official or formal channel and informal channel. So let's see what we have here. So first, as you said, we have the news media coverage, either TV or radio. It's true that they are actually a useful way to reach a wide range of public and quickly. So it's totally logical that crisis manager and communicators devote a considerable attention to media. However, as I said, the news media, it's not the only channel crisis manager or communicators should use to reach our target population. So we can also use the web-based communication, such as the websites, the social media, either written or audio visual content. It's true that not all targets will use them, but enough do to justify the inclusion of web-based communication. Also, you forget employees. We just talked about them. So they are basic target population, so we don't have to forget them. So we can use the intranet sites as useful mean or channel for reaching employees mainly. So I don't know if you know it or not, the use of mass notification system should also be considered. So this mass notification system helps deliver short messages to specific individuals through a mixture of channels. Phones, text messaging, voice messages, email, etc. And also, depending on the risk, it can be the very first tool, even before social media or media. For example, if the place must be evacuated immediately, we can send that to the public before giving any additional details or before going to media, to TV to present the information. Also, one very important thing you forget to mention that we don't have to forget the old traditional means of communication, such as megaphone internally or externally, etc. You should always keep in mind that these alternative channels, because as you obviously know, during a crisis, the internet, phone signals, electricity can be interrupted, so we cannot reach our target population, for example, by using news media or by using social media, etc. So always keep in mind these traditional means of communication as alternative channels. So once target population and channels are precise and identified, it's time to diffuse the message. So communication efforts seek to do the following. First, inform your target audiences about the crisis. Also, you have to explain risks associated with the crisis. For example, just yesterday, unfortunately, there was a very big uncontrollable fire in a forest mountain in region of Tunisia. So when they communicated the messages, apart from warning the inhabitants of the fire itself, they communicated another risk associated with this fire, which was the fact that animals can run away from this mountain and run away from this fire and go to residential areas where inhabitants live. So people must take care and be careful concerning this point. Also, we have to explain the government response. We have to convey reassurance, but not false hopes. For example, we can say, we're doing our best, your government or country is responding with all its power, resources to save as much life as possible. But we don't say, not worry, nobody's gonna die, we will be all safe, etc. We don't give false hopes to convey reassurance. Also, we have to reduce crisis-related uncertainty as much as possible, promote self-efficacy, and emphasize key messages we want people mostly to remember. So here's an example of key messages template. I don't know if it's clear or not, but anyway, it mentions the most important information we want to emphasize to influence our target population. So generally, the initial message must provide any information needed to add public safety, provide basic information about what happened, and offer concern if there are any. So now the maintenance phase. Who wants to ask a question before moving on? All clear. Okay. So as we said, we move on to the maintenance phase. So this phase is characterized by an ongoing assessment of the event and allocation of resources. So everything done during the initial phase is going to be updated according to the evolution of the crisis. Also, during this phase, emotional reactions vary. So at first, people may appear to be relieved despite the surrounding destruction or death because they are happy they survived. However, once basic survival needs are met, other needs for emotional balance and self-control emerge. So as the maintenance phase evolves, people may experience varied emotional states that we am already talked about, including denial, flashbacks, griefs, anger, guilt, hopelessness, etc. And the longer the maintenance phase lasts, the greater these reactions. In addition, this emotional state is worsened by the unknown future and uncertainty about what will happen. So we have to always keep the public updated. To do so, we have to hold news briefings or conferences as needed as appropriate. We provide or refine messages as more information becomes available and confirmed. We inform and explain government's new decision and provide support and supportive information to those who need it. Also, why not to inform the public about the municipality needs and the way public can help. We can also gather, or we have to gather public feedback from the affected people if the measures undertaken satisfy their needs, if they are sufficient, if they understand our messages, if we are holding conferences in a time that doesn't match their preferences, if they are being helped enough, etc. And to have all this information, we must seek public feedback, listen and learn and assess their needs. Also, as the crisis evolves, there is room for rumors and wrong information. So we have to monitor the media and clarify or correct inaccurate information, misunderstandings, and rumors or unclear facts. Now, moving on to the resolution phase. So as the crisis resolves or begins to resolve, there may be a return to the status quo with a better understanding about what took place, etc. So in this phase, complete recovery systems are activated and there is less public and media interest. But we must continue communication to the general public and affected groups. So during this phase, communicators should do the following. Inform the public that the crisis is about to end or has ended. In ongoing cleaning up, remediation, recovery, or rebuilding efforts, recommend to the public actions to get back to normal, improve individual understanding of new risk or possibility of risk. Actually, you know, as the public just saw and lived the crisis and knows very well its serious consequences, they are more likely to respond to safety and public health messages. So it's now or never. You can induce or transmit your public health messaging or warnings. Also, once the crisis is resolved, you may need to respond to the intense media scrutiny on and demand on how the response was handled. Also, you have to congratulate and thank organizations that have helped. And even when the emergency is no longer on the front of page, those who have been most severe affected will continue to provide significant emotional needs, so we have to provide continuous support to the affected people. And finally, the evaluation So here we will conduct a post-crisis evaluation with members of the team. So typically an after action report, sometimes called hot wash or lessons learned, is generated through a process of reviewing reports and consulting the key people involved. So we have to always keep in mind that no response is ever perfect and there is always learn. So we have to consider the crisis as a learning opportunity. So we will evaluate the effectiveness and performance of the communication plan during the crisis, identify lessons learned, refine and improve communication plans for future use. So in general, the evaluation process will seek answers to the several questions, such as what lessons were learned, what could have been done better, where did we excel, do policies need to be amended, what type of training could have improved our response, etc. So before I continue, does anyone has a question or anything to add? Okay, that's great. So now let's move on to some do's and don'ts, in which I will present some instructions or recommendations for an effective crisis communication. How it's going to work? Before I give you each instruction or recommendation, I will give you some hints, images, first letters, etc. So you can think of it a little and find the instruction yourselves. You can raise your hands or use chat as you wish. So first best practice or first instruction. As crisis communicator, you have to be yes, Victor.
Fast.
Yeah, you have to be first instruction is, as we said, to be quick or fast. Actually, crises are, you know, they are time sensitive, so you have to provide response as soon as possible, preferably in the first hour after the crisis occurs. On the other hand, silence is too passive. It lets others control the story and suggests that the organization has yet to gain control of the situation. Thing you have to know is that for the general population, the first source of information often becomes the preferred source. An early response may not have much new information, but the organization at least positions itself as the principal source and begins to present its side of the story. But a quick response is crucial and shows an organization is in control and generates greater credibility. That puts a great deal of pressure on crisis manager to have messages ready in short period of time. And here again, we can appreciate the importance of pre-crisis phase preparation that will make it easier for crisis manager to respond quickly because we have prepared our key for each type of crisis. We have prepared our key messages for each type of crisis. We know already our target audiences and the best channels to reach and influence our target audiences, etc. So that helps crisis managers and communicators to respond quickly. Second, so as crisis communicator, you have to be
Transparent.
Yes, exactly. So as crisis communicator, you have to be transparent. It means that you have to provide accurate information. People do want accurate information about what happened and how the event might affect them. But because of the time pressure in a crisis, there is a risk of inaccurate information, and these inaccuracies make an organization look inconsistent. So if mistakes are made, they must be corrected. At the end of the day, looking inconsistent is better than being incredible, and people will trust you and appreciate your transparency. Also, be transparent means also that you have to share negative possibilities. If you are aware of possible future negative outcomes, let people know what to expect. If outcomes might be bad, tell them. Also, by being transparent, being transparent is by delivering a message that is backed by evidence. So public health crisis communication should be evidence-based, not only for credibility, but also so the public can follow the reasoning behind a recommendation and become more likely to act on it. And finally, being transparent and credible means that you have to acknowledge and normalize uncertainty or scientific uncertainty. That means you should offer only what you know, and you can emphasize that a process or a system is in place to learn more. You can use messages such as, we don't yet have all the information and scientific evidence necessary to reach a certain conclusion, but we are doing our best to find answers as soon as possible. You also can inform public when you will possibly know this missing information or time for next conference, and alert the public that the messages or recommendation may change as more information becomes available, so you won't appear inconsistent when you change a message. So there's two recommendations: be transparent or credible, and quick have an important implication, because when public safety is a concern, people need to know quickly and in an accurate manner what they must do to protect themselves. Okay, next instruction. Can you guess? So here we have many persons that are saying the same information. It's not necessary that is just one word. You just have to find the sentence, the instruction.
Would it be like unified?
Yes, exactly. So use unified message or one voice. So you have to speak with one voice. Exactly, that means you have to deliver a unified message. One important thing that I just already said, but it's so important to repeat, that speaking with one voice does not mean that only one person speaks for the institution, especially during a crisis. So it's just physically impossible to expect that just one person will speak for the entire institution or organization, as we said, especially during a crisis where there is too many demand on experts from the media, and we have too many messages to send and to convey. And also, as we said, the media wants to ask questions to many experts of many fields related to the crisis. So the crisis team needs to share information so that different speakers can still convey a consistent message, and all responsible participants are immediately aware when the message changes. So at the end, ensuring that the message is consistent keeps the communication focused on the crisis response rather than on correcting contradictory content. That's why we have to establish our partnerships during the communication building and network, so we can share the information within. Next. It begins with the letter E.
Empathic?
Yes, exactly. So is empathy. We have to communicate with empathy. So actually, crisis communication plans, yes, they are designed to be responded to, but without expressing empathy and concern for the public's well-being, a communication plan will likely fail, and people can be reluctant because they won't act on an advice from someone they don't feel that he cares about them. So we have to communicate with empathy, and crisis managers should express concern and sympathy for any victims of crisis. We have also to recognize people's hardships and inform how they got assistance and support, so that we convey the message that we were empathic and we were supporting the. We have also to show respect and acknowledge fears. We don't tell people that they should not be afraid, as they have all the right to fear the worst during a crisis. And when the crisis results in serious injuries or deaths, we must consider including stress and trauma counseling for employees. And next instruction. So it's the logo of what? You use it every day? I thought it was the easiest one.
Can you repeat the question again, please?
So here, two images that are referring to an instruction for an effective communication. So and there is the first word that is already written, and we have a logo of what? Which app?
Messenger.
Yeah, so
Liquid Messenger.
yeah, so credible message.
Incredible. Incredible. Okay.
So we have to call on credible messengers. Actually, public health professionals creating a crisis communication plan should find credible leaders or messengers to endorse their messages. So what you should know is that the public tends to trust public health crisis communication when the person endorsing it is a health official or expert. On the contrary, media and government officials, they always face distrust because the information is perceived as politicized. Next instruction, you have to, as crisis manager,
Investigate.
investigate or inspect what?
It can be like confirm the information or something like that.
Yeah, have to monitor media. So media monitoring is the next instruction. You have to counter misinformation and disinformation quickly because our credibility is at stake. So the evolution of the crisis places further media demands on communicators. So unexpected developments, rumors, or misinformation may appear, and whether it's an honest misunderstanding or falsehood intentionally diffused, wrong information can spread quickly during crisis. So staying on the top of the information flow and maintaining close coordination with others is essential. And tracking communication activities and media and audiences becomes increasingly important. So to do so, we have to continue to consistently deliver factual and evidence-based information to maintain the public trust. And as soon as wrong information begins to spread, we have to battle this information or disinformation and point out why it's incorrect. As we said, we must have an evidence-based message so the public trusts us and can follow the reasoning why our information is the correct one and the rumor is the false information. Okay, now next instruction. So what do we call what's related to face expressions, gesture, body language? I'm sure you know it. Otherwise, I will designate anyone from the participants. Okay, most of them. think is not here. Who wants to take it? Okay, I'm sure you know it, but we'll see it together. So the next instruction is to control your non-verbal and verbal communication. In high concern situations such as crisis, non and paraverbal messages such as how you look and how you sound can be even more important than what you say and will influence the effectiveness of information. So in crisis communication, non-verbal and paraverbal messages are quickly noticed, and people often perceive body language and tonality as more accurate indicators of meaning and emotion than the words themselves, because they are the public or citizens, they are on defense and not sure you're telling them the truth, so they pay attention to this detail. So you have to pay as much attention to the way you inform people as you do to the content of information itself. So I think it's before the last instruction. So here we have a very long communication messages, and we are making it shorter by saying only essential things. So communication or message has to be begins with C.
Concise.
Exactly.
Concise.
Yeah, exactly. So communication has to be make communication concise. Present a short, concise, and focused message with limited detail, or what we call cut to the chase. So when people are scared or anxious, they have a hard time taking in and remembering large amount of information, and they want a message that can digest quickly and put them into action without delay. So only include immediately relevant information in the very first message. Don't start with a lot of background information. Don't spend a lot of time presenting yourself or your organization. A sentence or two should be enough. And always remember that messages that are overloaded with details might go unheeded, take too much time to be understood, or cause misunderstanding. And finally, kiss. So obviously, we are not going to kiss everybody or to kiss the affected people. Anyone know it's the abbreviation of what? Kiss. So it's keep it short and simple. So it's an acronym or abbreviation often used to describe an effective communication, that we must keep the communication or messages short and simple so the public can get them. Okay. And finally, I'm not sure, this is I think the hardest one. I'm not sure if you're gonna get it or not. So here we are, the imagine these are the spokespersons or the crisis manager. How can we describe them or describe what they are doing? Any attempt?
It can be like a person that brings calm to the situation or something like that.
Are here they are bringing calm?
No, I see that they don't have calm, so I figured out that it can be that the person that the spokesperson can bring calm to the situation or
Yeah.
something like.
Yeah, exactly. I got the meaning, and it's almost the same thing I wanna say. So they are over acting or over dramatizing the situation. On the contrary of over dramatizing, what we can have. Imagine we have the crisis, and here is the spokesperson. What she's doing is the contrary of over dramatizing. Ria, it's over. it's over reassuring. I know it was really hard to get it from this images. That's why I said it's the hardest one. Finally, you don't have to don't over reassure, and on the contrary, don't over dramatize. It's okay. We have to agree that the situation is indeed shattering, and being afraid it's a natural reaction, but we don't placate, and on the contrary, reassurance can backfire. So you have just to express appropriate and accurate level of concern. I remember, for example, in Tunisia during the first wave, we were one day at 57 cases, and the official spokesperson was in hysterical states. She was yelling, shouting while passing messages. She was crying, etc. Also, the Ministry of Health in a press conference, she was crying and likely in a hysterical state. So it's true that it was the highest number of cases in Tunisia since the beginning of the wave, but still the number was not thousands of cases or hundreds of deaths, such as in many other countries, and there was no need for all this drama for 50 cases anyway. So actually why I am saying that, because when you over dramatize and after a certain moment the people do not see that the situation is really very serious, afterwards when the situation worsens really, they don't believe you anymore when you over dramatize, and that what happened in Tunisia. In addition, after 6 weeks of lockdown, we came back to 0 cases. The responsibles came out in video, taking off their masks and celebrating the success and victory against Corona. So that was over reassurance on the contrary. It's true that it was something to celebrate, to be maybe really proud of, but the message should be accompanied by the fact that the virus is still there and we should continue to be careful, etc. So as a result, everyone lowered their hands and no longer follow the protocol because we just succeeded and celebrated success and victory against Corona. So the victims after a few weeks, number of victims was thousands, and the second wave was way more serious than the previous one. So that said, we have to, as mentioned, express just appropriate level of concern without neither over dramatizing or over reassuring. So now I will give you just some tips or advices to make your messages more informative. Before you have any questions. Great. First, you have to repeat the message. So reach and frequency are common advertising concepts. They suggest that messages are more apt to be received and acted upon when the number of people exposed to the message and the number of times each person hears the message go up. For example, Dr. Richard, which is a former acting director in the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, said that during crisis, it's really hard for people to really hear what you're saying, so repetition becomes essential. Another technique used indeed to repeat the message, but also to frame the discussion and not let it drift, is staying on message. It consists on that message should be clearly stated at the outset and returned to as often as possible. For example, if you want to emphasize that the risk to the public is low, you can start by saying, I want first to begin saying that the risk to the public is very low. And then when the occasions allows that, you can say, for example, as I said a moment ago, the risk to the public is low. Or before I close, I want to remind everyone that the risk to the public is low. Or if you are asked a question, you can take this opportunity to say that's an important question, but before I answer this question, I want to again stress the fact that the risk to the public is low. So I think you get it. But pay attention. Don't be so repetitious with a single message, and don't repeat your message word for word every time you answer a question. because you may appear to be trying to convince people of something that isn't true. Also, second, we can put the good news in the secondary clause. For example, for the message, it's too soon to say we're out of the woods, even though we haven't seen a new COVID cases in X. So the main clause indicates that you are taking the situation seriously and that you are responding aggressively. And the second clause indicates that the reassuring information without over reassuring. Also, we can create actions and action steps in threes or fours, or create abbreviation or acronyms. You have to know that in emergency, somewhere between 3 and 7 pieces of information is the limit for most people to hold in short-term memory. For example, I want you to memorize these letters in 3 to 5 seconds. Okay, that's enough. So who can say or tell me what were the letters? Okay, that was expected. So now if we organize them that way in 4 sentences, GPS, QALY, which is quality adjusted life years, Wi-Fi, and GAP, which is a brand, it becomes way much easier to memorize them, because instead of memorizing 14 information, which are the 14 letters, we have just to memorize 4 informations and that we were already familiar with. So that said, there are ways to make basic information easier to remember, such as clean, separate, cook, and chill for food safety, stop, drop, and roll for fire safety, RICE. Who knows this abbreviation? RICE. Okay, it's risk, compression, and elevation injuries, and RACE, it's rescue, remove, alarm, confine, and evacuate or extinguish for fire. So as I said, there is always, not always, but if the occasion allows it, we have to make basic information easier to remember, and that what most of crisis communicators do to help remembering the basic information. Also, we have to avoid technical jargon because it creates a barrier between the sender and the receiver. So avoid creating these barriers by saying things in less complex ways. For example, instead of saying people may suffer morbidity or mortality, you can say people exposed may become sick or die. Instead of epidemic or pandemic, you can say outbreak or widespread outbreak. You can say send or put in place instead of deployed. You can say relationship or instead of correlation, etc. So that the information becomes more easy and easily digested. We also have to avoid judgmental phrases, such as you would have to be an idiot to try to outturn a tornado, or only hypochondriacs would need to walk around with a prescription for Cipro. So nothing happens by insulting audiences with words or the tone of your voice. On the contrary, you will face less adheres. So that doesn't mean you should not condone the behavior, but offer a better alternative and the reason why it's very much better. And finally, I will finish with this some recommendations. So first, attack the problem and not the person or the organization. For example, if someone who is giving wrong information, first address the information. You may after suggest that there are maybe better positioned source to give the specific information, etc. Also avoid discussion of money, especially in the initial phase of crisis. You don't want to show that the loss of property or expenses are more important or are as important as the loss of human. And finally, you have to avoid discussing liability during the crisis. As we said, questions of close, blame, responsibility, and liability often follow the crisis. It's not appropriate to discuss them at the early stage. Instead, you can use statements like, our focus right now is on containing the situation. So, who has a question? Okay, I think it's clear. I'm gonna leave you now with VM again. She will talk in depth about the spokesperson. So all these recommendations can be related to anyone involved in the crisis. It could be the hospital director, it could be the crisis manager, communication coordinator, etc. Now VM will talk specifically about the spokesperson. Thank you so much for being attentive. It was a pleasure for me to present this lecture. Thank you so much.
Okay, hello everyone again. So we come to the last part of today's lecture, in which we will talk about the spokesperson, the requirements and the challenges of his job. Before we tackle this part, I want to ask you some questions. So can anyone tell me that if choosing the right spokesperson is important? What do you think? Anyone can take the stand and represent the authority? Come on, guys. Victor? Ines? Yeah, Rabeh, please.
I think yes, choosing the right spokesperson is very important, considering that a spokesperson is basically a liaison between the public and the communication command. So choosing the
Exactly.
right words to say and choosing how to say it with all the right emotions and all the right expressions is important in order to not spread fear, and also in order to maintain the right flow of information.
Okay, right on point, Rabbi. But I still want to ask you, should we have some criteria on which we should select the right spokesperson? What are the criteria, you think?
I think the first could be a proper command of the language.
A proper command, yeah.
Because you have to use all the right words, and then I think emotional intelligence could also play a role in making sure that a person, and also a good public speaker.
Good.
In that side.
Okay,
so, yeah.
Should he be an expert of the subject? For example, should he be an epidemiologist? If we're going to talk about a pandemic?
I don't really think so. I mean, it could be an advantage, but
okay.
I don't know.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Rabeh said that it's not important, or it's not necessary for the person to be an expert of the subject that he's going to address the public with. Let's see, I'm gonna correct some information for you, but overall your response was accurate. It's important that the person is confident when speaking to public. He needs to master public speaking attitude. Also, in the chat, sorry, I'm reading the response of Yeboah Clifford. He said that, yes, it is very important because such person will be kind of the representative for the whole team in front of the public. So it's very important to choose someone who's experienced, yes, and has the right information. And he should be experienced in the good public speaking skills and expert in the field. Nice, and thank you so much, Clifford, for your response. Okay, so let's recap. As Rabbi and Clifford said, in fact, choosing the right spokesperson, it is of utmost importance. In fact, spokesperson allow the public to put a face on the act of responding and investigating and resolving crisis. They help how a spokesperson handles a public and media inquiries, help establish credibility of the organization and of the government. Authorities should carefully choose the personnel who will represent them. And this selection, as we were saying now, should be based on two factors. First of all, the individual's familiarity with the subject matter. So the individual should be somewhat an expert of the field that he's going to address the people with. Secondly, he needs to his or her ability to talk about clearly and with confidence. He needs to be a very public, very confident person while public speaking. Okay, the right selection and training of a spokesperson can lead to better outcomes. In fact, if possible, have the crisis spokesperson appear in public often to establish somewhat of familiarity and credibility for your organization. He or she should not be a new face each time or each conference. If we're gonna select someone to be a spokesperson, we need to, preferably we need to maintain that. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. Throughout the Brentwood Postal Facility anthrax case, which happened in October 2001 in South Dakota in America, 5 postal officers died from an anthrax bioterrorism. For those of you who don't know it, anthrax, it's a serious infectious disease caused by gram-positive rod-shaped bacteria, and the inhalation of anthrax can be very dangerous. It is fatal up to 90% of cases. After the accident, of course, an epidemic intelligence service officer met with the Brentwood workers several times to discuss the antibiotic prophylaxis. According to the CDC guidelines, he recommended 30 days of therapy in addition to the anthrax vaccine. An activist in the crowd started shouting inflammatory comments because he did not or wasn't convinced with these recommendations. But because the officer had established himself as a credible and trusted source of information, instead of rallying up to the activist, the crowd told the heckler to be quiet so they could hear what the officer had to say. So as you can see, the choice of the spokesperson here was accurate, and he succeeded in gaining the trust and the confidence of his audience. And this resulted that the Brentwood facility workers adhered to the recommended treatment, and thus, which made the death rate drop to 40%, which is an accomplishment. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit in detail about the role of the spokesperson in crisis communication. During an emergency, the spokesperson should communicate information the public needs or wants. Also, this information should be empowering to people. It should help build the trust and reduce the levels of harm, whether it's psychological or physical, short-term or long-term. He should seek to accomplish several goals. what he's going to say on each meeting, what are the important messages that he needs to convey to the audience, etc. He needs to be prepared to respond to a variety of questions. People are going to have questions, especially at the beginning of the crisis. What is the incident and how severe its magnitude? What are the health and safety risks for individuals and communities? What is managing who is managing the event, and what are they doing to respond to the incident? Also, the spokesperson needs to establish an appropriate level of empathy and concern. He needs to remain calm while acknowledging uncertainty, avoid the tendency to over-reassure or over-dramatize like we have seen with Ayoub. Also, show competence and consistency in responding to help, confidence, and trust. If you know, panic usually doesn't come from bad news, but it's mixed. It comes usually from mixed messages or the feeling that people aren't being told the truth. Something is happening; they are hiding something from us, and thus we're gonna act. We're gonna feel threatened and act. Probably, it's gonna lead to a panic state. Also, a spokesperson needs to demonstrate openness and transparency, and as the events unfold, he needs to address more controversial issues, such as the people that are ignoring the safety recommendations, the criticism, the blame, etc. Remember, it is extremely important that the spokespersons are not solely responsible for conveying messages, and they must be involved in the development of the message to ensure some ownership. So spokespersons shouldn't read the statement. If they don't fully understand the purpose behind the messages or recommendations, they will have difficulty assuming a sense of confidence and conveying believability and trust. Another important message that I need to draw your attention to, that crisis usually comes with heightened public emotions, like we have talked at the first chapter of this lecture. And it's added to the limited access of facts and an environment of rumor, gossip, speculation, assumption, and interference. All of these factors result in a very unstable information environment and a lack of trust, probably leading to a panic state. So the only way to counter these negative results is to establish a good crisis communication plan with a very trusted and credible spokespersons. Okay, now as you have seen, the spokesperson, his job is of utmost importance. Now let's see some tips of success. You're probably gonna see some things that you have already seen with Ayoub, but it's okay. I won't be long, and I won't give so much. I won't go in details. So let's start with empathy. A spokesperson should demonstrate empathy and caring. He needs to speak clearly to demonstrate care and concern, and he needs to listen to the people experiencing the emergency, which will often reveal exactly which information they are needing to hear so they can calm down. Also, the spokesperson needs some competence and expertise. Education and experience can help establish credibility. About jargon, your job as a spokesperson now is to make complex information more easily understood by everyone at your community. Also, the spokesperson needs to demonstrate honesty and openness. Being honest, frank, and open with information. If you don't have that information, or if it's not available, you need to explain what your organization is doing to get it. Also, provide regular information updates and being honest about progress and challenges. If we face a challenge, we need to address that and tell the people that yes, we faced a challenge, but we are making some things to get over with. Okay. Finally, you need, as a spokesperson, to demonstrate accountability. So you need to keep promises that you already gave to your community, and you need to evaluate progress to help your organization improve its communication. Now let's talk more about the challenges of being a spokesperson. As we have seen, it is a job, it's a bit of a difficult job. So the first challenge that you're gonna face is attacks from the audience, from reporters, from the media, etc. You should know that you don't have to respond to attacks with another attack of your own. You need to respond to issues and not people, strive to end debates and not further them. Secondly, you need to pay close attention to your attitude and non-verbal messages. Remain calm, attentive, and of course, polite. Don't let your feelings interfere with your ability to communicate positively. Never convey disgust, frustration, indifference, or smugness. The people, like I said in the beginning of the lecture, the people will have a close eye on you. If they see if you are that you are frustrated or angry or sad, they would sense that and they probably would feel threatened. Never lose your temper. You need to control your control it, and don't allow your body language to affect your message. With regard to humor, avoid it. No one wants you to be humorous during a disaster. If used, direct it at yourself. Don't use it in relation to safety or health or describing risk. Jargon, we talked about this already. You need to use an everyday language that everyone can understand. Don't present lengthy presentations. Plan, practice, and deliver a 15 minutes presentation. That's enough to convey the messages, the important messages that you want to send to your audience. Also, your job as a spokesperson, you probably will receive some negative allegations. You need to refute them succinctly, and don't repeat allegations and refer to them in ways that give them credibility. Also, do not say off the record. People don't like that word. Always assume that everything you say and do it as part of the public record. Don't make side comments and confidential remarks. You need to speak for the organization you represent. Use always the pronoun we as an organization. Never disagree with the organization you are representing. And especially don't say, personally, I don't agree with what they are doing. Speaking for myself, I don't approve of that. Or if it was me, I wouldn't do that. Okay? This will probably make you and your organization look ridiculous and untrustworthy. Besides, you need to be careful with using promises. Don't make promises you can't keep and give false hopes to people, and never make promises on behalf of someone else. It is better to state your willingness. We are willing to end the spread of the infection. We're gonna try to, but you don't say, we will end the spread of the infection. Promise only what you can deliver. For speculations, do not speculate. Stick to the facts. Always state what has, is, or will be done. Don't speculate on what could be done or what might happen. And with regard to statistics, use them to eliminate larger points and to emphasize trends that, and achievements. And do not overuse statistics. Now, we're gonna move to another part of this lecture, which is the working with the media. There are some basics that you need to know. It is a challenge to work with media. It is tricky and overwhelming, and but the media is the primary mean for communicating with the public. People receive most of their information from different outlets like we have seen with Ayoub, newspaper, online publications, television, radio, and of course, social media. During a crisis, working with the media can be time-consuming, but it is a necessary evil, like they say. It's the best mechanism to reach your audience, and it is most important during the first hour of the emergency. Take in mind that forming positive relationships with the media is crucial for the success of your communication plan. While working with the media, the spokesperson will probably have to be included in conferences and present information at public meetings. So you need to know that what you do and how you do it will affect your audience's perception of you, your organization, and of course the credibility of the information you are provided. So you need to prepare and present effectively. Before the meeting, first thing you have to do is that you have to focus on your audience. You need to know who they are, where are they from, what are their interests and concerns, what are their likely perceptions and biases, will they be receptive, resistant, or even hostile? So these are very important information in addressing an first step before going to a public conference. And if you do not know any of these, if you do not know the answer of any of these questions, you need to find out. Okay, now after you have established a good relationship with your audience, you need to prepare your presentation. We're going to talk in detail about preparing the presentation. First of all, you need to develop a strong introduction. Develop a maximum of 3 key messages. Assemble your supporting data, prepare audiovisual aids, and prepare for answering questions. And of course, most importantly, you need to practice. So since we're talking about preparing the presentations, let's talk a little bit about the elements that should be present to have a successful presentation. In fact, a strong introduction is crucial in attempting to establish trust and credibility. Remember that perceived empathy, it's a vital factor to establish credibility, and it is essential, and it is assessed by your audience in the first 30 seconds. So you need to work on your making your intro stronger and appealing. You can choose to start with a statement of personal concern. I can see by the number of people here tonight that you are all as concerned about this issue as we are. Or you can start by a statement of purpose and a plan for the meeting. So tonight we would like to share with you the findings of the report for approximately 15 minutes. Then we would like to open the floor for discussion, questions, and concerns. We will be available after the meeting to answer any additional questions you might have. So starting with each one of these statements or both of them, it's a good way to start your lecture. Second part of your presentations will be dedicated to the key messages and supporting data. So I think you all know what are key messages. They are points you want your public to have and to have in mind after the meeting. They should address central issues and be short and concise. You need to have a maximum of 3 key messages for which you need to brainstorm. You need to identify the most important ideas, and you need to identify your supporting data. Now you have completed the intro and the key messages. You need to finish with a conclusion. The conclusion should contain a summarizing statement in which you restate verbatim your key messages, and add a future action statement. For example, you can say, you can talk a little about what your organization is going to do about this problem in the short term and long term. Now, we're gonna talk more in details about the presentation. In fact, as you probably know, speaking in public is tricky. You can make mistakes, and you need to know that when planning, practicing, and conducting the presentation, you need to consider some factors. First of all, you need to consider your attire and grooming. You need to dress as you are expected to look at your place of work, or perhaps slightly less formally. Avoid distractions and repetitive gestures, such as a constant throat clearing, checking your watch, jingling your keys, or change, and pacing. You need to take a deep breath and relax. As for facial expressions and eye contact, they are crucial. So you need to know that your mouth, eyes, forehead, and eyebrows also communicate. And you need to try not to fidget and move a lot, glance around, or lick your lips often. Gestures can enhance and decrease the quality of your communication. So be aware of yours and make sure they are appropriate. With regard to your pace or rhythm of your voice, vary your tempo. Speak slowly to emphasize key messages, pause for emphasis, and vary your voice pattern. Also, pay attention to your posture because it communicates attitude. Try to have a straight face with a straight stance with legs slightly apart. Do not slouch or be rigid. And finally, the intensity of your voice reflects your confidence, competence, and also openness. So, what's your audience for feedback? Adjust to your surroundings. Don't make your audience strain to hear you, but don't slouch at them either, shout at them either. Finally, it's most important that you use audio-visual aids. Of course, you probably know this, audio-visual aids can make your messages easier to understand and most importantly, easier to remember. So make sure that they are able to stand alone, illustrate a key concept, and use pictures or graphics rather than words whenever it's possible, and represent facts accurately. Don't do the mistake of speaking about something and some statistics while you have other statistics on the presentation. That conveys usually less of credibility, and it lessens the trust of the people in you. Now, certainly, during public meeting, you will probably need to expect some questions. That's your job as spokesperson. You need to be prepared. If you know your audience and the subject, most questions can be anticipated. Secondly, you need to track your key messages. Always use the responses and opportunities to re-emphasize your key messages. Keep your answer short and focused. Usually don't go further more than 2 minutes long for an answer. Practice self-management and listen, and always speak and act with integrity. If always say the truth, and if you do not know, say so, and say, as I said before, say that what you are doing to get that information, or that we're gonna get that information for you in the next meeting. Okay, so we have finished with the challenges and requirements for the spokesperson. Now I hope let's wrap this chapter of the lecture with some top 9 tips for a savvy communication. First, you do not harm. You need to know that your words have consequences and be sure that they are the right ones. Do not babble. You need to know exactly what you have to say. In a crisis, every word counts. Focus more on informing people than impressing them. You are not there to impress anyone. You need to use everyday language. Never say anything you are not willing to see printed on tomorrow's front page. For example, if you say to a reporter, between you and me, the guy is an idiot. You should expect to see that statement in a scandalous story in the next morning's newspaper, and it won't make you look good. Fifth, never lie. You won't get away with it. Don't make promises you can't keep. Do not say no comment. No one likes that statement. Do not get angry when you argue with the media. You will always lose, and you lose publicly. So you need to always control your temper. Do not speculate, guess, or assume. When you do not know something, say so. So this brings me to the conclusion of today's lecture. I hope the last part was clear and concise. So before wrapping up this, I need to ask you something. Did you understand the spokesperson requirements and challenges? Do you have any questions about that part? Okay, so let's move on. So during a crisis, let's wrap up with a conclusion. During a crisis, simple communication mistakes can cost the public's trust, leading the people away from the recommendations and risking their safety. So communication guidelines during crisis provide a roadmap to improve communication and make it effective. It can help communicators learn what to say, when to say it, and how to say it. It is a way to talk to people during a crisis to get them information they can understand and actually use. And remember, the right message at the right time from the right person can save lives during emergencies. Okay, let's recap. So usually bad crisis communication is characterized by mixed and conflicting messages from multiple sources, late release of crucial information, overly reassuring communication, paternalistic messages, for example, messages conveying that authority knows better in a controlling way, unaddressed rumors and myths, public power struggles, conflict, and confusion. This is chaos. So instead, we use good crisis communication, effective crisis communication, which is characterized by simple and consistent messages, timely release of information, express empathy, exhibit expertise, remain honest and open, use an already established effective crisis communication plan, and most importantly, reduce the high levels of uncertainty and fears among people. So, thank you for your attention. We are most grateful for the rapt attention which you have presented through this lecture, especially Ines, Abdel, Rabai, Victor, and Winston. Thank you so much. We hope that you have learned something from it, and we are at your disposal for if you have any question. No questions? Hello, Monica.
Hey.
Monica, we don't hear you.
Yeah, you're muted, I think.
Okay.
The same old story. So wait. Okay, guys. No, I was saying, I was thanking you for this super interesting presentation, super comprehensive. So I'm sure the students learned a lot from you. I also found it super interesting because this is the topic of my master's degree thesis. So I mean, a part of it was in my thesis. So I also mentioned the quote of Barbara Reynolds. So it was super interesting. Yeah, I really hope the students enjoyed it. And if they have any question, they are more than welcome. If not, I think that we can close this session. And you know that we are meeting in 20 minutes for the student presentations. I'm reading the messages, so it seems they really enjoyed it. I'm very happy about it. And thank you so much for being here, really.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was really our pleasure to be among with you today and to present this lecture. And I hope, as you said, it will be not the last coordination between us.
Of course,
Yeah.
of course.
I
it
believe
won't.
so. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm reading the chat. It was amazing. Thank you very much. I'm super happy about it. Okay, so then if you can share with me the slides, I will upload them on the platform. If you have any other material that you consider useful for the students, please send it to me so I can also upload that. And yeah, thank you very much. And also thank you, Hamdi, for putting us in contact for this amazing session. Great. Okay. So thank you, William. Thank you, Ayub. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. And I'll see you guys in 20 minutes. Take a break. You deserve it.
Thank you so much.